It's Wednesday night Bible study online. For all of you that have been there on Wednesday nights, and I've certainly enjoyed working with you and studying with you, we're going to continue on. And Steve, Jim, Wayne, we might get through chapter 11. You just never know. It's a possibility. But hope that you've had opportunities to get into God's Word. It's been a busy time for me. I haven't been in the office, but man, it's been a busy time. And I've enjoyed it, but I hope that you've also enjoyed it as well, as best you can in the midst of where we are. So let's jump right into it, all right? Let's get into Romans chapter 11. Now, remember, 9, 10, and 11 of Romans. Very important to keep the context in mind. Chapters 1 through 8, Paul has made a dissertation, if you will, about what it is, what's salvation, what righteousness in God, how do we become righteous? And there's no way that we can become righteous other than by faith through the righteous Son of God, Jesus Christ. His righteousness is given to us from the cross, basically. The death on the cross and the resurrection from the dead, which proves his righteousness, proves his message. That righteousness that he has is transferred to us as we transfer our guilt to him. And so that's what chapters 1 through 8 is all about. They're beautifully done. You need to just go back and read them. Just read them straight through. I think it's read it in a new, good new modern translation. It'd be great study for you. Then, chapter 9, he does a kind of a right turn. And seems that chapters 9, 10, and 11 are a bit out of place. They're not in the scheme of things, but just by looking at where we have spent so much of our time in chapters 1 through 8, 9, 10, and 11 come almost as a surprise. So, what's the surprise? Well, Paul begins to talk about what about the Jews? Why did they not believe? Why have they, at least in general, forsaken Jesus Christ, who is a Jew, who proclaims to be Messiah, and gives his life for them? Why do they not follow in faith? Now, we know that there were a number who did, Paul being one of them, which is very, very important. We have spent some time talking about Calvinism, about the elect, and what does that mean? And again, we won't go into great detail. We'll answer some of those questions when we get back, if you have them. But we've talked about the fact that really chapters 9 in particular talks about election from the point of understanding that God has chosen, has elected to use Israel in the gospel. And then by their lack of faith, they turn from that. And in chapter 10 is talking about their responsibility. They had a responsibility to turn. They had every benefit of being able to turn and accept Jesus, but they didn't. And so chapter 11 then picks up on this and says, now, what about them? Are they lost then? Is that it? And you'll see in these verses that Paul has a strong belief, and we believe as inspiration of God, obviously, or it's not it wouldn't be in the Bible, that God has more things in store for Israel yet to come. Now, we have to be careful with that. We have to temper that a little bit, because sometimes we can go overboard and say, well, we know how that's going to work out. We don't. We do not. Paul did not. We do not. Well, Israel's, I understand the enthusiasm, and certainly all of those things are roadmaps directing us to what God's going to be doing. I don't know how he's going to do this. And your suppositions are as good as anybody else's. All I can tell you this morning, or this afternoon rather, looking at this passage of Scripture, is that it's going to happen. When, where, how, we don't know. Let me turn my mail off so we don't get that extraneous noise coming through. So, without further ado, let's pick up where we left off. We are in verse 11 of chapter 11, all right? So it reads, I'm reading from the Christian Standard Bible. I ask then, have they, Israel, stumbled so as to fall? In other words, have they fallen away to the point, and their hearts are hardened, that it's now too late? And he says, absolutely not. No way. On the contrary, by their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make Israel jealous. Now, if their transgression brings riches for the world, and their failure riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their fullness bring? Now, let's talk about it. First of all, what about Israel? Have they fallen? Do they have no hope? And he says, no, absolutely not. And then he gives you something. I have in some of my notes here, I may refer to it, I may not. I'll probably forget as much as I remember. But there are stages here. There was a stage, obviously, going all the way back to Abraham. And we'll mention this a couple of times. The patriarchs. Who are they? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And if you remember in Genesis 15, God makes a covenant, a promise with Abraham and his seed. Paul in Galatians talks about the seed, not the seeds, but the seed is Jesus Christ. And that's how he interprets that, and so do we. That the seed is the promise of someone who will come and bless all the nations. And we see that fulfillment in Jesus. Now, what he's saying here is here's a stage. And there are various stages within this first stage. We know that Israel was disobedient quite often. The Old Testament is full of that. How, as they were a pre-nation under Moses, a nation under David, and past that they rebelled again and again and again. But the rebellion that he's talking about here, where it says, salvation has come by their transgression. What is the transgression? The transgression is that the Messiah comes and they reject him. That's the transgression. They have rejected Jesus. Now, have they rejected Jesus completely? Not completely, but by and large, the nation of Israel has rejected Jesus. And he says it is for, let me get it right, salvation, because of their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Now think about it for a second. It was very interesting when I was studying about this afternoon. Do you remember back, let me digress. If you remember back a couple of years ago, we were studying Judges. We were studying Samson. And you remember Samson was a rogue prophet. I mean, he was a rogue. He was a rascal. He did all kinds of things bad. And one of the things that he did is he really got under the skin of the Philistines, the arch enemy. In fact, the enemy that was overseeing the government of tiny Israel at that point, before they were a nation. It was a pre-nation, but they were dominating them. And here Samson comes, and he gets them riled up to the point that it says they want to kill all the Israelites. Now, what's significant about that? God uses Samson's disobedience and bad behavior in a significant way to the benefit of Israel. How is that? Well, if you go back and you look into Judges, you will find there is a there are a couple of verses there that says that Israel was becoming very comfortable living under the influence of the Philistines. So much so that when Samson got the Philistines upset, the Israelites went to the Philistines and said, hey, we'll take care of him. Don't worry about it. We got him. We'll kill him. And they didn't. And the Philistines got really incensed, and it caused a major division. God used that behavior of Samson that was negative. He used it in a positive way because he caused a great rift between Israel and the Philistines, whereas before they were almost one people and Israel was about to lose their identity. So God used a bad thing for a good thing. Got that? All right, now go fast forward to Jesus and the Israelites. The Israelites, and we know that in Acts, the first few chapters, the Jews are coming, by the thousands. But there are many more thousands who reject Jesus, and the longer it goes, the more rejection that there is. And that rejection is significantly important. Why? Well, you need to understand something about Jewish religion. Now remember, Jewish religion had been unique and had gone through the tests of time. They'd gone through defeat, captivity, repopulating their nation under Greek rule, under Roman rule, and still the Jews believed in one God, believed in their scriptures, believed in the prophets, all that stuff. All those things had remained there. They were a religion that was identified worldwide as a Jewish religion. What would happen if the Jews en masse, if all the Jews had turned to Jesus? What would the world look at that religion? They would have looked at it as a Jewish revival only. They would have looked at it as some kind of a new way of doing Judaism. That's it. And as a result, the rest of the world would have paid no attention. Well, potentially. I understand. I am speculating here. But God uses that rejection to get the notification of the Gentiles, and then uses Paul and others to tell the Gentiles about the message to the Jews, and they begin to turn their hearts to the Lord. In fact, if you remember, there was a significant amount of people who were Gentiles who were called God-fearers. Lydia was one of them. And they hung around the synagogue. What did Paul do? What did the missionaries do? They went first to the synagogue. The God-fearing Gentiles would hear it. The Jews would reject it. And the Gentiles would say, tell us more. And that rejection and acceptance became much more of a division, not within the Jews, but within the Jews and Gentiles. So God uses something bad for something good. And that's what Paul is saying here. So because of their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles. So the good news comes to the Jews reject it, the Gentiles say, let me hear more. Then he says, it's come to the Gentiles for what purpose? To make Israel jealous, verse 11. And he says, now if their transgression brings riches for the world, and their failure riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their fullness bring? So he's saying that what happened, the gospel begins with the Jews, it goes to the Gentiles, and now he is saying, I believe that they are going to say, we need that, we see that, we want that, and their envy is going to drive them back. It's going to go from the Jews to the Gentiles to the Jews. And that's the fullness of the gospel. We see a little bit of this in Acts chapter 6. If you look at that later, you remember it's when the deacons were first instituted. And that, there's a little verse in there that says that the priests, after this, turned to the Lord, were converted. Why? Well, one speculation, and it's a good speculation, that the Jews had been tasked with taking tithes and offerings and then taking care of the poor and the widows. But they weren't doing it. But guess what the church was doing? They were taking the tithes and the offerings, and the deacons were instituted to take care of the poor and the widows. And so maybe the Jewish priest said, that's what we should be doing. We need to do that. We are envious of the way you are fulfilling the law. Let us hear more. You see, and that, I think what Paul's saying is that there, he's going to say a little bit more about this, but he's saying that because it's gone to the Gentiles, it's now rebounding back to the Jews. Okay, now he's saying, now in verse 13, now I'm speaking to you, Gentiles. That's you, by the way. You're a bunch of Gentiles, okay? Insofar as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry. And that's what he says, I am pleased to do it. That's what I want to do. That's what God's called me to do. If I might somehow make my own people jealous and save some of them. He said, I do this to give you the gospel, but I also do this so that the gospel will rebound to the Jews. For if their rejection brings reconciliation to the world, what will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? He's saying, if their rejection brought the gospel to the world, and that was a good thing, how much more would it be? What kind of influence would it be if the Jews would turn their hearts to Christ? What kind of influence would that be? He said it would be like the dead coming to life. It'd be an amazing thing. And then he says in verse 16, kind of a difficult verse to understand. I'm not sure I do. Now, if the first fruits are holy, so is the whole batch. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. And I think he's saying what God instituted in the patriarchs in the Old Testament, and what he started there was holy. And so the roots are holy. The branches will be holy. It's a great thing. God will not leave this holy setup, if you will, that he started. All right, let's go on. Still talking to us a little bit. Now, if some of the branches were broken off, that would be the Jews. Okay? That would be the Jews. And you, that's you Gentiles, though a wild olive branch, are grafted among them and have come to share in the rich root of the cultivated olive tree, do not boast that you are better than those branches. Okay, here's what he's saying. Here's what he's not saying, I don't think. He is not saying in an election Calvinistic way of saying, you're either in, you're out, we've broken you off, you're not in anymore. I think what he's saying, remember, starting back in chapter 9, he's talking about the nation of Israel and how God has used them with the expansion of the gospel and so forth, how they rejected it. But he's saying in their rejection, he has broken off that branch, and that branch is no longer being used to magnify the gospel. If you go all the way back to Abraham in Genesis 15, the whole idea was that the world will be blessed, and the Jews said, we're not doing it because we're not believing it, and we're staying by ourselves. Paul says that God has taken off that branch and has put in a grafting of a wild olive branch. I are olive branches that are wild. We weren't there early on. We were not by nature part of that olive tree, but we've been grafted in. Now, one interesting thing that I read about this is that there was a horticulturist theologian back maybe a couple of centuries now who made this statement. I don't even know if it's true, but I'll give it along to you. I assume it is. He said that there would be oftentimes an olive tree that would be dying, not good, lost its enthusiasm, if you will. And one of the things to bring it back to life, to infuse life into it, they would take a wild olive branch and graft it in. And that grafting in brought a liveliness to that tree. And that kind of makes sense, that the Gentiles bring a certain passion into the Judaism that was kind of stagnant, if you will. It wasn't dead, but it was not good. Also, he says that they have taken part in the rich root. They share in the rich root of the cultivated olive tree. Here it is. All the prophets, all the law, all the patriarchs, we now take part of that. That's why we say we believe in the Bible, Old and New Testament. The Old Testament, we're part of that. By faith, we are Abraham's children. We are grafted in to the branch, and we share in the life by faith that all the Jews had been promised, that holy lump, if you will, and the holy roots. And he says, all right, now you Gentiles, don't boast. What he's saying, you don't belong here. By nature, you've been grafted in. Paul uses this several times in his other letters, that our sinfulness, we were rebellious, we were far away from God, we knew nothing of God, and yet God in his mercy, God in his grace brings us to himself. He said, if it were not for the mercy and grace of God, you would have nothing. You would be lost completely. So don't get proud about who you are. If someone says, are you a Christian? Your answer should be, well, of course I am. That's a proud answer. But rather say, yeah, can you believe it? That's amazing, isn't it? Someone like me is loved by a God like that. So don't boast. He goes on. But if you do boast, you do not sustain the root, but the root sustains you. So if it weren't for the root, you have no life. Don't forget that. Then you will say, branches were broken off, so I might be broken in. Well, hey, look, God made room for me, so I must be special. That's not what he's saying. True enough, verse 20, they were broken off because of unbelief, but you were broken off but you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but beware, because if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. He's saying, yeah, that's true. Branch was broken off. We get that. And the reason, by the way, this is important, the reason it was broken off was not, God said, I think I'm going to break that off. But no, it was their rejection. It was their unbelief. And they are not used now. They are not blessed. Their hearts are hardened as a result of that. And you are grafted in because of belief. But he said, don't be arrogant. Don't be proud. Don't look down on people who don't believe. Don't look down on, especially in this day when Paul is writing, and remember, it's writing to a church in Rome that was as much Jewish Christian as it was Gentile Christian. And how's that working? He's saying, listen, you Gentiles, don't look down on your Jewish buddies and say, you're not that special. And he's saying, no, they're very special. They're very special. Therefore, consider God's kindness and severity toward those who have fallen out of God's kindness toward you. If you remain in his kindness, otherwise you too will be cut off. Now, he's not talking about losing your salvation, but I do think he's talking about we lose in our arrogance, in our unwillingness to follow the gospel, in our ungracious, unmerciful attitude, we lose the effectiveness of the gospel, and God refuses to work with us. We see it happening in churches today, where the gospel and the grace of God and the blood of Christ is not that great. We don't want to talk about it. Let's just talk about we're nice people and we love all people. Let's not talk about God. Let's not look at the Bible. We see a lot of churches, and the effect of that is they're losing their witness. We in America, the American church, I think is very tenuous right now. I think there's a lot of sickness in the American church. And who knows, in the next 100 years, I'm not going to be here, and you won't be here. But what's to say in the next 100 years that the center of Christianity might be Africa or a South America or even a China? And they're sending missionaries here. Why? Because in our arrogance, we forgot God. That's what he's saying. We have to be very careful with that. Stay humble. All right, let's keep going. I'll try to finish. How long we got? Okay, I'll take another 10 minutes. And then, even they, if they do not remain in unbelief, they will be grafted in, because God has the power to graft them in again. He's saying, look, the Jews, they can be grafted back in, but it's only by belief. By the way, there is no such thing, I don't know if you've heard of this, as two covenant theology. And it's happened in a lot of churches because we have a bad reputation of sharing the gospel with the Jews. We're almost like anti-Semitic. And so what some people have grown in their theology is saying, well, we don't need to tell the Jews because the Jews are God's chosen people, and there are two covenants, God's covenant with them, covenant with us through Jesus, and they're going to be okay. Baloney. There's only one name under heaven by which one man may be saved. That is Jesus Christ. And that's what it says here. They can be grafted in if they believe. Period. They've got to stop unbelieving. All right. For if you were cut off from your native wild olive tree and against nature were grafted into the cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, the natural branches, be grafted back into their own olive branches? He said it's going to be an easy thing. You were unnatural. You had nothing to do with the prophets, the law, and the patriarchs. You had nothing to do with them. You were not natural. If God can graft you in, certainly he can graft in the Jews who are part, where it should be a part of that tree. I don't want you to be ignorant of this mystery. A mystery, by the way, is something that was unknown and that is now presently known. So that's the mystery. He said, I don't want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so you will not be conceited. You see, Paul's concern is that we become arrogant, conceited, and proud in who we are. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And I don't have an idea what that means. Some people say, well, it's going to be X amount of Gentiles. We got to get it in every nation. Whatever it means, it's what it means. When that time comes, we're going to say, that's exactly what that means. But it does mean that more people, Gentiles, are going to come to the gospel. And when that time comes and God blows a whistle, he said, all right, we're ready now. That's when Israel is going to hit the floor running according to the gospel. And in this, verse 26, and in this way, Israel will be saved. Now, he's saying all Israel will be saved. He's not saying every last Israelite, but I think he's talking generically that Israel, by and large, will come to the gospel. They will be saved. But now look how, as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob, and this will be my covenant with them, and I will take away their sins. Quoting from Isaiah, what's he saying? He's saying a deliverer will come. Who is that deliverer? Not a second covenant, but Jesus Christ alone. That's the Redeemer. That is the deliverer. And so by faith, they will turn to the Lord. Won't it be a great day? Regarding the gospel, verse 28, they are enemies for your advantage. You see, that's to your advantage right now. But regarding election, they are loved because of the patriarchs. What does that mean, election? Does that mean that they're elected to be there and they don't? No, they have a choice. I do think he's talking again about the purpose of Israel, that he will at one time, God will at one time reinfuse, regraft Israel by faith into the branch, and that will be his purpose. That will be his elected purpose. Since God's gracious gifts and calling are irrevocable, it's going to happen. Verse 30, as you once disobeyed God, but now have received mercy through their disobedience, so they too have now disobeyed, resulting in mercy to you, so that they also may now receive mercy. For God has imprisoned all disobedience, so that he may have mercy on all. He has seen our disobedience, and he is having mercy upon us through faith. Not universalism, but by faith we have mercy. God came to his people rejected him. Because of his rejection, the gospel comes to us. Because the gospel comes to us, it comes back to Israel. And that's what he's saying. Now, let me give you these last few verses. Let's see if I can find my notes here. Got to get there. Hang on. I'm almost there. Because I thought the way that this person said it was very, very well said. Look at these last verses. Paul suddenly, and out of a great sense of joy, sings a hymn. And it's a wonderful hymn. Oh, the depths of the riches, both of the wisdom and the knowledge of God. How unsearchable his judgments, how untraceable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor, and who has ever given to God that he should be repaid? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. Now let me just give you some thoughts here. Let me read them for you. Four thoughts here, and we'll close. There should be no worship without truth. No worship without truth. What does that mean? We don't just worship a nice thought, but when he says, oh, the depth and the riches of his wisdom and the knowledge of God. How do you get the knowledge of God? You got to open his word. You got to talk to him. You got to let him talk to you through the word. You don't worship without truth. This is one of my pet peeves, is that we just get a tingly feeling and we feel we worship. No. Think. Apply. Consider. That's when you worship. When that brings you. Well, that's the next thought. Conversely, there should be no teaching or study of truth without worship. Yeah, see, that's the flip side of it. You got to know what the knowledge of and the wisdom of God is by looking into his word, but study alone is not enough. Study should lead you to worship. It should not lead you to conceit and arrogance, but it should lead you to humility and joy and worship. And the third thought is, doctrines that exalt God lead to the greatest joy. When we exalt God, not God, you did this for me, and God, you gave me this, and God, you're wonderful for me. That's good, but that's not the depth of the riches of God. It is looking at who God is and getting excited about who God is. Not what he does for you, but who he is. And the last one is this. We do not need to understand everything to praise the God who does. You don't have to have all of your understanding put in order, and now I'll worship God, but we worship God and we trust him even when we don't understand it. Coronavirus, we don't understand. Why now? How is this affecting us? When are we going to do this? When are we going to get back to church? Oh, no. Yeah, stop. Let me read that last thing. For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. And we don't know what those things are. But we know they're from him, for him, and to him. And we bring him glory. Well, I finished 35 minutes, Jim. Got it done, buddy. Steve, hope you're proud of me. Now, glad to do this. We'll continue on next Wednesday night. Thanks for being here tonight, and we will see you. God bless you. Bye-bye.